Welcome all my fellow Redskin brethren and sistren. It's news that's nightly about the Redskins. Welcome to the Redskins Nightly News. I, of course, am your set man, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. Let's get to tonight's lead story. So, I was listening to the Kevin Sheehan Show podcast, and I've talked about that on this show before and how I trust Kevin and some of the insight that he gives. He shares a lot of the same sentiments as I do, but he's a little bit more plugged and tapped in to Redskins Park. He used to work for a radio station that was owned by Daniel Snyder. He has access to the players and the coaches and did at one point. And so he knows people in that building and has people that talk to him in confidence. And he's able to kind of formulate opinions based on some of the things that he is told by some of the people in the building at Redskins Park. So I say that to reiterate that he still thinks that Bruce Allen will be fired at season's end, but he threw a little nugget in to his episode a couple of days ago, and I thought I would save it for today. And he said that the league meetings are next week. Owners' league meetings are next week. And if you remember, and I remember this very vividly, and if you remember, I've talked about this before. Remember, Bruce was hired in December of 2009. Why? Because Vinny was fired at these very same league meetings some 10 years ago. Could Bruce Allen be fired as early as next week? And if he's going to get fired, would it be next week? Or is that a sign that he isn't going to be fired? So I'm going to start with, could he be fired next week? It is very possible if Dan has already made up his mind. Now, I don't think Dan has made up his mind. I think Dan is leaning towards a way or not leaning towards a way. I think there is a lean going on with Dan, but I think if the Redskins finish up this season strongly, there's a chance that Bruce and the whole gang could be back next season. I've already stated my position on this. These final 4 games of the season should have no impact, no bearing on the decision-making for Daniel Snyder in regards to Bruce Allen. If you're going to rely on these last 4 games to tell you if you need to fire Bruce or not, then again, therein lies the problem, and this thing will never get fixed. So again, the decision should already be made, but if it isn't, and he's on the fence, at least you got to see what happens in this game, because if the Redskins somehow manage to beat the Green Bay Packers, and again, I can't see any way in hell that happens. All right. We are not a good football team. Keep that in mind. I think a couple of wins and people are going delusional again. Like, don't allow them to suck you in here. We beat Jeff Driscoll and Kyle Allen. All right. 2 backup quarterbacks with limited NFL experience. That's what we accomplished the last 2 weeks. All right. Now, as impressive as last week's victory was, Carolina's not that damn good themselves. And that's why they just fired their head coach. And that's why they're 5-7. Okay. They're not that far away from the Redskins. We're 3-9. They're 5-7. All right. They're a skip, hop, and a jump. They're the next town over. Okay. So they're not that much better than us. They have some funkiness in them as well. So this is a 9-3 outfit we're going up against this week. This is Aaron effing Rodgers, a.k.a. AR-12, a.k.a. the bad man. Okay? He's as close to the boogeyman as you get in this league. All right? That's what we're facing up against. And by the way, we've had success against him at FedEx, not at Lambeau. Okay? We have not beaten Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre, or any other Green Bay Packers quarterback in the last 30 years in Green Bay. So that's another obstacle that the Redskins would have to overcome. But back to my original point. If somehow, some way the Redskins were able to pull that one off, that could set off a chain of events where Bruce is back. So is Bill Callahan. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the show. And so is Greg Minuski. All right. And I don't want to see any of that take place, but I'm not going to root for the team to lose either. But understand what this could mean. I don't have to root for the team to lose because we're playing a team that is superior to us. I expect a loss here. But could Bruce be fired next week? It's very possible. That's been Dan's track record. That's his MO. League meetings before the season's over, get a head start on looking for the next guy, get rid of him at the league meetings, and move on. If it's not done, does that mean that Bruce is going to be back and Dan isn't going to make a move? No, that doesn't mean that. He could just say, you know what? I want Bruce to handle this final league meeting, all right, before the season's over. And then once the season's done and I have a chance to collect my thoughts, figure out what my next move is, get rid of Bruce, all right? Maybe promote from within. Maybe Kyle Smith is your next GM, all right? Or maybe you go outside the building to find that guy. Maybe Doug Williams is your next GM. I don't know. I don't know what he would decide to do at that point, but I would like him to do it in the proper order. That's something else the Redskins haven't always done in the past. Remember how we got Jim Zorn as a head coach? You know how that happened? Because they hired him first and then went looking for the head coach. And it's supposed to be GM who then hires head coach who then hires his own staff. So I hope that they do this in the right. Now, the only member of the staff that I would be willing to make an exception for and say, hey, look, he comes with this package. Whatever you're going to do, you got to take Kevin O'Connell. That's the only guy I'm willing to make an exception for. Everybody else can get the hell out of here. And I love Jim Tomsula. I don't know if he wants to be back or not, especially with Greg Minuski most likely being gone. That's his homeboy. He might want to go because, Greg Minuski's gone. But Jim Tom is more than welcome to stay if he wants to. I love that guy. Love the work he's done with these defensive linemen, especially Matt Ioannidis. And Jonathan Allen swears by him. All of the guys do. I mean, Matt Ioannidis, a.k.a. the Golden Greek is what they call him. He's a guy that swears by Jim Tomsula. They asked him after the game, what have you seen in terms of your game? What's the biggest change that you've seen in your game that allows you to get after the quarterback the way that you have the last couple of seasons? And he said, Jim Tomsula. It was blunt, plain and simple, straight to the point, nothing else. He didn't say technique. He didn't say I'm dialed in. He didn't say hours of film study. He said Jim Tomsula. Okay, so that tells you how he feels. Jonathan Allen swears by him, says it's the best coach he's ever had in his entire life. So again, Jim Tom is welcome to stay. So is Kevin O'Connell. I know a lot of you have said Bill Callahan can stay on as offensive line coach. Trust me, if he doesn't get the head coaching job, he's not going to want to stay here as offensive line coach. All right, that's not how it works. Guys have egos. I don't get the job, I'm going to move on. That's generally how it works. Same thing happened with Greg Williams last year. He could have stayed in Cleveland if he wanted to as the defensive coordinator, I would think. But he didn't get the job. He was the interim head coach. They moved on from him, promoted another guy behind him. He didn't want to stick around for that. I was your boss just a month ago, and now you're my boss? No, that's not how that works. I mean, could you imagine him going back to being an offensive line coach? No, I can't see that happening. So those are the two that are welcome to stay. Everybody else, adios. So when I look at this situation, sure, he could be fired next week, but he could also be fired at the end of the season. I still contend that nothing is going to take place. And this little flurry that we're on right now, where we have a chance to win probably 5 out of our final 6 because no one's afraid of Dallas, no one's afraid of Philly, no one's afraid of the Giants. We could easily win those games and mess around and win 5 out of our final 6. And all of a sudden, there we are, close again. And you know what? If we get on a little streak like that and the Eagles continue to sputter, and if we beat the Eagles, that means they're sputtering down the stretch, then we could easily finish in second place in this division. Think about that for a second. As bad as we were this season, we're going to finish with a second place schedule potentially, and it will make us look like we were close, and we're not close to anything other than a top 5 draft pick. Okay, so I still contend he's not going anywhere. As adamant as Kevin Sheehan seems to be, and he continues, and he was adamant last year, okay? As adamant, and he seems even more sure of himself this season, which I'm getting somewhat excited, but I won't allow myself to be sucked in, and neither should you. I'm keeping my number at 7%. I do not think Bruce Allen is getting fired. I just don't, but changes need to be made. Are those changes going to be made, and will Bruce be a part of them, remains to be seen. I think we're going to have a new head coach. I think we're going to have a new defensive coordinator. I think we're going to have a new staff for the most part, with maybe a few holdovers. But will Bruce Allen be a part of that change? That's the most important part. And until it happens, I'm going to continue to believe that it's not going to happen. But I just want to throw this little tidbit out that Kevin Sheehan threw out on his podcast the other day that, hey, look, league meetings next week. That was the time where Dan decided to move on. And remember, we were in that same frame of mind. If you remember back a decade ago, for those of you old enough to remember, just a decade ago, we were thinking the same thing about Vinny. He's never going to get the hell out of here. He's never going to be asked to leave. Vinny is always going to be here terrorizing us and turning this organization into a dump. And he finally moved on from Vinny. Maybe the time has come for him to do the same with Bruce Allen. We will see. It could happen as early as next week. Keep your eyes peeled and your ears to the streets. We will see what happens. Obviously, this game it may go a long way. It shouldn't, as I've said before, but it may go a long way in determining Bruce Allen's fate. If the Redskins win or are very competitive in this game, I don't know. The guys in that building are very delusional. So all things are on the table when you're talking about the decision-making process with Daniel Snyder and all of the other people that he trusts in this organization. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, let's go on to in other news. And today's Thursday, so you know our customary press conferences that we get on Thursdays. Head coach Bill Callahan, interim head coach Bill Callahan, stepped to the podium. Also, defensive coordinator Greg Minuski stepped to the podium. What was said by both of them? Actually, some nice tidbits from both of them. I'll start with Bill Callahan, the interim head coach, and he pretty much talked about, a lot of questions came his way about Preston Smith. So he had to talk about Preston Smith, and he pretty much said, look, players grow in this league. He used an example of him being in Oakland with, I was almost about to say Zach Crockett. I know a lot of y'all don't even remember Zach Crockett, but no, he was talking about Tyrone Wheatley, a guy that was a highly drafted player in this league. Didn't really amount to much in his first couple of stops in Miami and New York with the Giants. And he said, hey, we got Tyrone Wheatley in Oakland, and Wheatley was actually pretty good in Oakland. And he said he flourished in Oakland, and sometimes guys just need time. And I tell you guys this all the time. Players mature. Sometimes it takes longer for others to mature. And that's why I said you can't look at this player or that player. And that's what I've been telling you about Dwayne Haskins. I've been telling you that about Montez Sweat and some of these other guys. You can't just say, well, he stinks right now, he's going to stink, and he can't ever get better. Everyone didn't have the light switch come on for them. And I said, that's sports in general. I said, you can kind of use the example in life as well. And I say that sports is usually a microcosm of life, and that a lot of the examples, a lot of the sayings, and a lot of the lessons learned in sports, you can transfer them over to life. And I feel that way about maturity. You know, everyone didn't mature at the same rate. You know, some people, they got to grow up fast. They live in an environment where, you know, you got to grow up faster than the next man that doesn't grow up until he's 28. You had to grow up when you were 13. You had to figure it out quickly for survival purposes. Same thing in the NFL. Some guys come in the league, hit the ground running, they get it right away, and they're able to make plays and help their team, like a Terry McLaurin. And then other guys just need time to develop. You know, they need time to learn the nuances, to get comfortable. And, you know, it may take them 2-3 years for that. I always talk about Nnamdi Asomugha. He came in this league. He was not the shutdown corner that he became year 1 or 2 for that matter in Oakland. It wasn't until year 3 that he started to have the success and the uptick in his play. And then by year 4, he was one of the best corners in the league. And so it takes time. Others like Charles Woodson come in right away, get it, hit the ground running. You know what I mean? You know, Patrick Peterson, same way. Impact right away, immediately. It's not the same for everyone. So he talked about that with Preston and said, yeah, Preston's having a great season, and he's continuing to mature and develop. And that's a lot of the times why if I see promise from a guy, I say if he's homegrown product, keep him here. There are certain guys that you feel like they've already maxed out their full potential. Like Brian Orakpo, when he left here, I was like, yo, yeah, let Brian go. Brian's maxed out his full potential. I know what he is as a football player. I'm good. Allow him to go test the free agent waters. And the Redskins did. But a guy like Preston Smith, I felt like there was so much untapped potential in Preston that we didn't get to, that I was like, if you just give him a couple more years, Preston will figure this thing out. And we didn't have the patience with him, and he moved on, and now you're starting to see Preston Smith really come to full fruition. And, some of the numbers bear that out. Remember, everyone laughed and scoffed at the notion that he was this, the highest pass rush pressure guy in the league. And everyone's like, what? Preston Smith only got like 6.5 sacks. What are you talking about? But it wasn't the sacks. He was getting there. He just wasn't getting to the quarterback, getting the actual physical sack, getting the quarterback on the ground, but he was pressuring the quarterback. Now those pressures are starting to turn into actual sacks this season. So he talked about that. He talked about, the development of a lot of the younger guys on the team. Most notably, he talked about Steven Sims and the opportunity that he's getting because of Trey Quinn. And, he talked about him being on punts and how they're trying to help him with that because, the issue with him, not being back there earlier in the season was they were afraid he was going to drop the football. We talked about that earlier on Redskins Nightly News. And so, they talked about that with him, talked about him getting better as a slot receiver as well. They talked about, kind of what the Redskins need to do to kind of slow down Aaron Rodgers, if at all possible. So he talked about that. He talked about the familiarity that he has with the defensive coordinator in Green Bay and Mike Pettin. Talked about him and his time with Mike Pettin in New York with the Jets and said, look, I'm very familiar with this guy. I respect him as a defensive coordinator. He's got a lot of looks that he can throw at a quarterback to confuse them, a lot of things that he does schematically that could be very difficult for an offense to digest. And so he talked about some of the things that they're going to need to do to offset that. So I thought it was a really insightful presser by Bill Callahan. And then you look at Greg Manusky. I actually thought, I'm not a big Greg Manusky fan. That's well documented. And so I generally don't even care what he has to say anymore. But I thought he did say some pretty good things today. And the only reason I really gave a damn was because he was talking about the youngins. And anytime you start talking about the youngins on this team, I'm all ears. I want to hear what you got to say. And so he was talking about the youngins. He talked about Jimmy Moreland. He talked about Montez Sweat. And he talked about their development. And he talked about Fab Moreau, fantastic Fab. And he talked about his development on the outside versus on the inside. He talked about Jimmy Moreland playing on the inside and how difficult that can be. And so he talked about Montez Sweat and how Sweat just 3 weeks ago had 2 sacks. Now he's got 5. And so you're starting to see an uptick in his production. And so on Montez Sweat, he said, look, and I just said this, but he reiterated that, some guys take a while for them to figure it out. He said the biggest thing, and I said this day one, before he was even drafted, when I broke him down. If you go back and you watch my film study of Montez Sweat before he even became a Washington Redskin, and even after he was drafted, I continue to echo the same thing, and it rings true. And Manusky echoed that same sentiment, is that Montez's best attribute isn't his speed, it's his length. His ability to be able to keep tackles at bay, at a distance with his length, is how he should be winning consistently in this league. He has something you can't teach. Speed you can't teach, length you can't teach. Everything else, technique, all of those things, setting up a pass rushing plan, you can teach all of those things. What you can't teach is speed, which he has, and length, which he has, which is more important than speed to me. If you've got length and you know how to use that leverage, you can get to the quarterback more times than not. And you saw it against the Panthers, and he talked about that. He said, look, Montez used this length against the Panthers, and that's something that he's got to continue to do. When he uses his length, that's going to be a winner for him in his league, and that's what he has to continue to do moving forward. And I'm hoping that he starts to use that a little bit more and funnel that into his game a little bit more, because that's the winning ticket at this level. Tackles want to get their hands on you. So if you're able to lay hands on them first and then keep them at a distance, you have a chance to win more times than not in this league. And so he talked about that with Montez. He talked about Fab Moreau on the outside and said, look, a lot of times with guys that struggle on the inside as a slot is that they just feel more comfortable out as a boundary corner where they know they have the sideline as another defender. And so not as much space to defend, not as much thinking involved. And so, and not everybody's built. I told you this a long time ago. Not everybody's built for the slot. And I told you this also. The slot is the most difficult position to play on defense, and it's not even close. All right, you ask me, the slot is where it's at. When you're talking about elite athletes and having to be mentally tough and really be a film study rat, you're talking about the slot. And he pretty much said that about Jimmy Moreland in terms of, hey, look, man, it's not easy being in the slot. He said, look, the best athletes, the quickest athletes at least on the field are in the slot. It's the toughest position to play defensively. And he said, Jimmy's starting to adjust. Jimmy was a boundary corner at James Madison. You got to keep that in mind. It's not like Jimmy was playing in the slot. And when you're as good as Jimmy was at his school, you're going to play out wide most likely. They're not kicking the most talented corner to the nickel in college. You're playing out wide, okay? So Jimmy had to make the adjustment. He's starting to get better at that, and they like the progression that they've seen from him, and Manusky kind of spoke to that. And then lastly, he talked about Odom and Nate Orchard's game and said, they asked him, was he surprised by their performances? And he's like, yeah, damn right I was. I didn't expect these guys to come off the street and produce the way that they did. He said, that, this defense isn't easy. Got a bunch of different calls, a bunch of different packages. He said Nate Orchard played over 30 snaps. Remember, you had the injury to Kerrigan. Then you had the ejection to Ryan Anderson. So he was really thrusted into the game. And, Nate Orchard even said it himself. Down on the goal line at the very end when he made the stop versus Christian McCaffrey, he said, I didn't even know what the call was. I just simply made a play and got to Christian McCaffrey. So for a guy to be new, really not know what's going on, and to be able to play the way that they did, I heard someone say that they actually played uncluttered because they didn't know all of the calls and they weren't in that scheme where they had to be bogged down by thinking. They were just able to go out and play, and that's why they played so well. And so now, the real test is, now that they're getting more comfortable and acclimated to these calls, will that then slow them down and force them to think as to what their responsibility is on any given snap? We'll see. But the Redskins were definitely impressed with Orchard and Odom. They get Kerrigan back this week, which probably means a guy like Odom will be demoted back down and won't be active on Sunday. But Orchard probably will. Looking forward to seeing what he does for a encore to his first performance as a Washington Redskin. And I wanted to get to social media maneuvers quickly. Couple of really interesting comments that were left on the video from yesterday, and I wanted to read them. The first one from Andrew Thompson, who writes, he says, Lou, I've listened to several other people give the same reasons you did for not wanting Ron Rivera. Remember yesterday on the show, I said, I'm good on Rivera. I think he's a really good coach, but I don't think he fits what we're looking for and what we need in Washington as a head coach, that we need a disciplinarian, a guy that is the opposite of Jay Gruden. Well, this is what he says. He says, I'm not arguing the point. He says, I think a tough authoritarian coach that holds people accountable and sets standards to create a winning culture is exactly what we need. My question is, don't we already have a guy like that at head coach now? Nobody likes Callahan because he's a Bruce guy, but I can't help but notice that he seems to fit the description that everyone wants in our next head coach. You even said that you think someone opposite of Jay is needed. From what I know about old Bill, that sounds like him. If Bill can keep winning, then you, me, and everyone else may have to take him a little more seriously as a head coaching candidate. All right, so that was a beautifully and eloquently articulated comment that I want to address. So, yes, Callahan is somewhat opposite of Jay Gruden, but there are things that Bill Callahan represents that we don't want in our next head coach. One is he's not a good game manager at all. And, I talk about the game passing him by all the time. And one of those reasons is because he's just not with the times. There's analytics. There's a lot of things. And I'm not an analytics guy. I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm the guy that's screaming go for two midway through the second quarter or late in the third quarter because you're down 14 and you want to have a chance to take the lead like the Ravens are doing. That's not me. Kick the goddamn extra point. I didn't like when the Redskins went for 2 versus the Panthers down 14-12 in the second quarter. I didn't like that at all. So I'm not that guy. However, he seems to not understand some of the subtle nuances of the game, like when to call timeouts at the end of the second quarter when you're trying to get the football back, or hell, you even have the football and have great field position and you're in a position to try to get points and you're not looking to just kick a 53-yard field goal like we did against Carolina and have it blocked, but actually want to get closer. He seems to botch these situations at the end of games. You should not be kicking a game-winning field goal with 20 seconds left, all right? In no alternate universe is that okay, all right? And so he just doesn't understand how to manage a game. He seems to be confused. He seems to be befuddled by just the simplest things and concepts throughout the course of a game. He doesn't know when to throw his challenge flag. He's wasted a couple of opportunities doing that this season that I wasn't particularly all that fond of. There's a lot of things that I'm just not keen on. And I'm also not a fan of his press conferences where he's essentially telling the opposition what we're going to do. I'm just not a Bill Callahan guy. And it has nothing to do with him being a Bruce guy. All right. I just feel like the game has passed him by from a head coaching standpoint. He may be a wonderful offensive line coach. We see old offensive line coaches get it done because they have the fundamentals down pat, like a Dante Scarnecchia in New England. He's like 150 years old is Dante Scarnecchia, but he's so good at what he does because he has mastered the art of teaching offensive line play. Same thing with Bill Callahan. I'm all for it, but in terms of being a head coach, he's just not the guy you want pulling the strings. And that's just how I feel. It has nothing to do with him being a Bruce guy at all, okay? I just don't like a lot of the things that he does, and I think we need someone to be a little bit smarter, more in tune to what's going on, and also a guy that can be a little bit more relatable to the players, okay? So these are all things that I have a problem with Callahan, and that's why I'm looking for an upgrade as our next head coach. So great comment, but that's where I stand on that. Then the next comment that I wanted to read is this one here by Tom Petty AF. He says, if you were not sold on Haskins then, what makes you sold on him now? Is it seriously because he cut back on mistakes? So I don't know what your time frame is and when you're saying that I wasn't a believer in Haskins, because ever since the Redskins drafted him, I'm on board. You already know that. But before the Redskins drafted him, if you're talking about the pre-draft process, I wasn't a huge, massive Dwayne Haskins fan. And you can check the record and let the record reflect that I wasn't a massive Dwayne Haskins fan. Anyone that knows and knows me and knows what my thought process was in those times, I was a Drew Lock guy. I was a Kyler Murray, Drew Lock guy. But I knew we weren't getting our hands on Kyler Murray, so Drew Lock was the guy that I was targeting. And Jay Gruden even said, look, Haskins is going to take some work, but Drew Lock is ready to come in and play day one. And so I was a Drew Lock guy. The reason I didn't like Haskins, I didn't think he was mobile enough, which he's already proven me wrong there. So that's one of the reasons that I absolutely think that he is much better than I gave him credit for, because you got to be able to extend plays in this league, either with your legs or with your pocket mobility. I didn't think Dwayne Haskins, when you watch tape, and that was one of my biggest criticisms of him at Ohio State was, hey, when he's asked to reset his feet and then throw the football, he's very erratic. And that's how he makes mistakes. When you get pressure and there's trash around his feet and he's got to reset his feet and then deliver the football, that's when he makes mistakes. Well, he's cleaned that up at this level. So that was my biggest complaint, along with the fact that I said, this guy is immobile. So that means I don't love the way that he manipulates the pocket. And then you're telling me he can't run. So you're pretty much saying he's a sitting duck. He's Eli Manning in the pocket. That's what you're trying to tell me. That I didn't like that. Well, he couldn't have been any more opposite of what I thought. And he said, and I told you this a couple of episodes ago, that he had an interview with John Keim, and John Keim reported that he said, look, he cut off a lot of body fat, and he shaped and sculpted his body differently when he got to the league. I think that combine really scared a lot of people. That, 5 and some change that he ran at the combine, that was scary. And that reinforced what I thought of him as an athlete. or lack thereof. And so he went out and he sculpted his body and he cut off some of that excess weight. And he was a different guy when he got here to Washington. And you could see it from the very first preseason game he played in, where he was running around. And remember, if you go back and watch that preseason game and the analysis that we had live on this channel, we were all ranting and raving about, man, this guy looks a lot more athletic than we thought. That was the biggest takeaway from the first couple of preseason games. It was like, whoa, Dwayne can move. And so that's probably one of the biggest reasons, because now he can extend plays. And we've seen him do that already in his young NFL career. So the reason I'm much higher on him now is because he's shown me the ability to manipulate the pocket. He's not afraid of the rush. He's willing to keep his eyes down the field and make plays. But not only is he able to do that, he's also able to reset his feet and deliver the football. He did it very well versus Carolina last week. So those are things that I'm encouraged by. And then the mobileness, all right? The ability to extend plays with his legs, the ability to pick up first downs with his legs. These are things that I didn't think he was capable of doing at Ohio State and coming into the league. And that has since changed since getting in the league. And so that's why I'm much higher on Dwayne Haskins than I was pre-draft process. So thanks for the comments, guys. Continue to have those funneling in. I'll continue to read them, and all the pertinent ones that I want to talk about on the air, we will do that on our social media maneuvers segment of the show. So let's go ahead and progress to the Redskins and this game upcoming week 14 versus the Green Bay Packers. What do the Redskins need to do to get a victory? So let's talk about what the Redskins can do to make this a competitive game first and foremost. Look, the Packers, for me, and to me, this is the best chance the Redskins have. The Packers have struggled all season long stopping the run. That's one of the one weakness that they have on defense, because I actually like their secondary. I like their back end. I like their defensive line. I like their front seven in terms of getting after the quarterback. But where they struggle is stopping the run consistently. Hell, last week, Saquon Barkley even had a really good game, almost 100 yards rushing on the Packers. You go through their catalog of games this season, and I've watched every single one of them. They've struggled to stop the run. And I think if the Redskins are going to have any shot at winning this game, the running game is going to be pivotal for two reasons. One, that's going to be the best way the Redskins have a chance to score in this game or set up scoring opportunities. Dwayne Haskins has still yet to throw a touchdown pass other than the screen and the 2-yard touchdown pass to Jeremy Sprinkle. And those, to me, were in garbage time versus the Jets. He's yet to throw a touchdown pass yet. So the ground game has been the catalyst for any points that the Redskins have scored during this little bit of a resurgence, if you will. And so the ground game is going to set up any scoring opportunities that we get. It's also going to set up play action fake. But more importantly, it's going to keep Aaron Rodgers and that offense off the field, because I do not think this defense is capable of slowing them down for a full 48 minutes. They may do it for a quarter. They may even do it for 2, but they're not going to do it for 4 quarters. This Redskins team has yet to put together a 4-quarter game yet. I don't see this being the week that they finally decide to do it. And so I don't think they're going to be able to stop the Packers offensively for 4 quarters. And so you got to slow them down by keeping them off the field, and running the football is the way you're going to do it. The weather report right now calling for rain and a potential shift in rain to snow. But either way, inclement weather. It's not going to be a nice sunny day in Green Bay. All right. It's going to be nasty and wet. And it's going to be one of those games that you should be able to run the football in. And if the Redskins are able to do what they did last week, they're going to have a shot in this football game. That, and they also have to take care of the rock. And that's something that they also did very well last week. The ball did hit the ground last week as Haskins was stripped of the football, but the Redskins were able to recover. No turnovers last week, and still the Redskins were able to force 2 turnovers. I said they had to be +2 in the turnover ratio last week to win. Same thing applies this week. The biggest thing is just don't turn it over. You may not be, because Rodgers isn't going to give you many opportunities to pick him off. So you don't necessarily have to be +2, but you can't turn it over. You have any turnovers in this game, you're going to lose. All right, the Redskins aren't good enough to overcome turnovers. Another thing they can't have in this game are the penalties. Last week, they pretty much stayed penalty free. There were a couple mixed in here and there, but none of the holding variety penalties and the false starts and the things that have derailed drives in the past for the Redskins. If they're going to have any shot this game of sustaining offense, moving the football down the field, and as I just mentioned, keeping the Packers offensively off the field, they're going to have to stay away from the penalties. 2nd and 17 is not your friend. Neither is 3rd and 13. 3rd and 6 is great, but getting a 5-yard false start penalty on 3rd and 6 and making it 3rd and 11 puts you in a spot where you're probably going to have to punt. If the Redskins can eliminate those mistakes, stay away from the long down and distances, keep themselves in 3rd and manageable, they'll have a shot in this game. Offensively, these are the keys to the game. Defensively, they have to first stop the run, and then secondly, get after Aaron Rodgers. When Rodgers and this offense have been stifled this season, and they've been stifled twice this year, 3 times if you count week 1. I'm going to throw week 1 out. They didn't seem prepared in that game. They lost to the Chargers, and they lost to the 49ers, both in blowout fashion. If we're to do anything remotely close to that, and I'm not saying blow them out, but to make that offense look pedestrian as they did in those 2 games, you got to get after Aaron Rodgers, okay? If you can get after Rodgers, then that offensive line at times has been a little faulty. If you're able to collapse the pocket like we were able to do against Carolina, make Rodgers uncomfortable. Rodgers does not want to get hit, all right? I've watched him in games where he's been harassed. I've watched him be flustered and looking for somewhere to crawl into a fetal position and fall so he doesn't get hit. All right. So he's one of those guys right now that when the pressure starts to mount, his eyes drop. In past years, Aaron Rodgers could give 2 shits about your pressure. He just get out of the pocket and then make something happen. Now, Rodgers has started to succumb to the pressure a bit. And when it starts to get too great for him to deal with, he's looking to fall down. His eyes drop. If the Redskins can get pressure early and often, it will shape the way Aaron Rodgers approaches this game. If you do not get pressure on him early in this game and he gets into a rhythm and he gets comfortable, the Redskins will. I'll just tell you this right now. If the Redskins start off the game the way they did against Carolina, where the Packers marched down the field early in the game and scored 2 touchdowns, this will turn into an ass whooping. This will not settle in. We will not scratch and claw our way back into the game, and we will not find a way to somehow miraculously score 29 unanswered points and win. If the Packers jump out to a 14-0 lead, we're going to lose the game something like 38-9. Okay? I'm just telling you right now, Aaron Rodgers is not the one. All right? He is not Kyle Allen. He is not Jeff Driscoll. He is not Josh Rosen. He is an elite future Hall of Fame quarterback, one of the best we've ever seen in the business. If you give him a running head start, he will smoke us. Okay? So you have to come out and you got to establish the line of scrimmage on both sides of the football, but more importantly, on defense, you have to get after Rodgers. And the way to do that is to first stop the run. And then the pressure that impacts him the most is the pressure on the interior, all right? And then the guys on the outsides have to do a good job of containing him and not letting him escape. You keep contained, keep him in the pocket. Once he gets outside the pocket, he's just as, if not more so dangerous than he is in the pocket. If the Redskins can do these things, they will have a shot to somehow miraculously upset the Green Bay Packers. They're 9-3, folks. We're 3-9. They're the inverse of us record-wise. There's a reason. They are way better than we are. They're going to prove it. I can't see any instance. And the last couple of weeks, I didn't think the Redskins were going to win. But in the back of my mind going into those games, I said, look, if this happens and that happens, we'll have a shot. But I didn't think we were going to win. There's no shot in the back of my mind that we're winning this game. Not a single one. The only reason I don't have the Packers scoring more points is because it's going to be a nasty day weather-wise. I think that's going to keep the scoring down a bit, all right? I honestly think the Redskins have a shot to not score a touchdown this week. This could be one of those 33-9 type of games, but I think the run game is going to somehow facilitate a score in this game, and thus you get the 13 points, 2 field goals, a touchdown for the Redskins in this game as they fall to the Green Bay Packers 29-13. So that's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on the show. I thank you guys for joining me. Make sure you leave it in the comment section, score and more. What do you think is going to happen week 14 versus the Green Bay Packers on the road. Do the Redskins stand a chance in hell of getting it done? Any other comments from anything else that was said during this show? I want to read it down in the comments section, whether you want to talk about Bruce Allen and him potentially getting fired next week, as early as next week, or not getting fired at all. If you want to talk about the Bill Callahan comment that we had during social media maneuvers, whatever you guys want to talk about, leave it in the comments section. I'd love to hear it and can't wait to read it. So I'm your man, Louie T, signing off. Remember, if it's not your man T, it's not the best NFL coverage it could be. Remember, we got skin in the game. Why? Because we're Skins fans for life. Until the next time we meet, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the Louie T Network for more great content, share this video if at all possible, and check out the Louie T Network podcast. Brand new episode coming your way tomorrow. Until then, I'm signing off. This has been the Redskins Nightly News. You know where to find me at the conclusion of Redskins Packers here on this channel for the Redskins Rapid React. I'll see you then. Guys, have a good one. Take care.